Welcome once again, my fellow manipulators of digital fate. I'm Richie, this is Capricorn, and welcome back to the spoiler season that never ends, pretty much. This is day 9 of spoiler season for Aether Drift, and a bunch of cool cards were spoiled today, although I think we got less today than we have been getting lately, so it's a nice little bit of a breather, but there's still a bunch of relevant cards to talk about, so we're going to get right to it. Please like the video, it helps me get it out to more people, it helps the channel to grow, and I appreciate it so much. Subscribe if you're new so you never miss an upload, and catch me live Monday through Friday over on Twitch. That's twitch.tv/quarantinecapricorn, because if I'm alive and I'm breathing, I'm there and I'm streaming. Let's do this thing. We're going to start off with Shefet Archfiend, a 5/5 demon with flying for 2 black and 5, and when this creature enters, all other creatures get -2/-2 until end of turn. It also cycles for 2. So this is a much worse version of that rare, or is it a mythic rare, that we already have in standard right now. Do you guys remember the name of that card off the top of your head? Let me know in the comments below. It was a 5/4 menace dude that gives everything -2/-2 when you play it, but it only costs 5. You can also discard that for 2 mana, but you give something -2/-2 when you do it. Whereas with this, when you cycle it, you draw cards. So it's not strictly worse. You can get a card off this when cycling it, which can be relevant if you don't have a creature you want to kill or something like that. But I mean, at the end of the day, this is an uncommon, so what do you expect? And I think in Limited particularly, this will be really good because early in the game you can cycle this away if you're not close to getting to enough mana to play it, but if you top deck this later in the game, it can be an absolute slam dunk home run bomb play that gives you a huge flying threat that can win the game by itself and clears out all of your opponent's small creatures. So I think the versatility of it not being a dead card stuck in your hand for the whole game if you never make it to 7 mana because you can just cycle it away actually makes this really good in Limited. But next up we've got Webstrike Elite, a 3/3 insect archer with reach for 2 green mana. That's right, it's a 2 mana 3/3 reach. That's already pretty good, but it also has cycling for 2 green and X. When you cycle this card, you destroy up to 1 target artifact or enchantment with mana value X. So if you want, you can just cycle this away for 2 green mana and draw a card and not worry about killing anything, which is awesome. You can also go the extra mile and still pay 0 for X, cycle it, draw a card, but kill an artifact or enchantment token, which is actually really interesting. Getting to kill a token for free while still drawing a card, only spending 2 mana, is actually really nice. And then if you do need to kill something more sizable, you can save this, dump some extra mana into it, and kill whatever you want. And it's worth noting that even when you kill that big artifact or enchantment, you're still going to get to draw a card, because technically you're still cycling. So I think the versatility of this card is what makes it so good. It can be your early 2-drop aggro play if you need to curve out appropriately. You can dig for cards you need by just cycling it away. You can kill tokens without really spending any extra mana, still drawing cards. And you can have incidental removal for big bomby artifacts or enchantments in your main deck. That can just take out those kinds of cards if you come up against them. And all of that put together, I think, makes this card really good. And this might be the first sign that a mono green stompy deck could actually end up being viable in the new standard if we get more cards that are as versatile, efficient, and powerful as this one is. But next up we've got Bounce Off, an instant for 1 blue mana, return target creature or vehicle to its owner's hand. This is just a better unsummon. Just a straight up, strictly better unsummon. You can hit any creature, whether it's yours or your opponent's, so you can use it as a way to save your own guys if they're targeted by removal. You can get rid of a threat, temporarily on the opponent's side, but it can also hit vehicles in the same way, whether to save yours or to get rid of your opponent's. So just a little bit of upside there. I really like this card, and I think it's going to make its way into a lot of the Limited decks. But next up we've got Maximum Overdrive. 1 black and 1 for an instant. Put a +1/+1 counter on target creature. It gains Death Touch and Indestructible until end of turn. This is actually a pretty good card. We've got, every now and then we got cards like this where at instant speed for 2 mana you can give something Death Touch and Indestructible, and it's really good specifically with Menace. I actually have a Menace tribal deck that I've been working on for a while, and I put a couple of versions of that online, and cards like this make the cut there because they have to double block. You make sure your guy doesn't die because of the indestructible, and you make sure both those guys do die because of the death touch. You only have to deal 1 damage to each of them. And so, in a deck like that, this card's really, really good. And the fact that you get an extra +1/+1 counter means even if it's just a 1/1 menace creature, you still get to make sure you kill both things that block it. And I kind of love that. I think that gives this card sort of a little bit of an edge over some of the other cards I've considered for that deck in the past. That being said, this is mainly meant for limited. It'll be a decent combat trick in that format that allows you to kill their thing, save your thing, with some extra value left over in the form of a +1/+1 counter that never goes away. And I think that makes this card really good. But next up, we've got Spectacular Pileup. This is a rare sorcery for 2 white and 3. It has cycling for 2, so if you don't need it, just cycle it away, draw another card, and all creatures and vehicles lose indestructible until end of turn, and then you destroy all creatures and vehicles. Now, I've heard some people talking about this card like it's going to be the new Sunfall and replace Sunfall. There's no way in hell that's going to happen. Sunfall is insane. Exiling, not worrying about having to trigger, you know, death abilities or putting things in the graveyard for extra value later on from your opponent or any of that, and getting extra board presence in the form of an Incubate token to boot. Sunfall is kind of irreplaceable and still the #1. That being said, when Sunfall rotates, this could be a really good option, and even until then, this still could be a good option for the right deck if you're running like, if you specifically need to get rid of vehicles, or if you're in the discard deck where you want as many of your cards as possible to have built-in ways to discard, to cycle to draw more cards, to just trigger all of your discard payoffs. In that deck, this might be the sweeper of choice, because you can sweep when you need it to, but when you get to that point in the game where you're just trying to tunnel vision on killing the opponent and getting as many discard payoffs as possible, it can just be another card that you cycle away, trigger those discard payoffs, draw another card, and keep the chain going. So in that deck, I think this card has a shot at being the premier choice for a sweeper effect, and it'll be really interesting to see if that's the case. But next up, we've got Crash and Burn. This is an instant for 1 red and 3. You choose 1, destroy a vehicle, or deal 6 damage to target creature or planeswalker. This card's pretty good. At instant speed, granted 4 mana is a bit much, but it's a common piece of removal. You can, you know, scoop up pretty late into a draft. If you don't have enough removal for your deck. It's instant speed, so you get to use it kind of like a combat trick, blow out your opponent, and regardless of how big the vehicle is, you get to destroy it. But if they do have a creature you want to kill that isn't a vehicle, 6 damage is also a lot, so it can almost kill any creature. It can definitely kill any vehicle. It can pretty much kill any planeswalker. Really versatile instant speed removal. Again, a little bit overcosted, but I think it's going to make the cut in a lot of limited decks. Next up, we've got Intimidation Tactics. This is one we actually saw a few days ago, but it was in a foreign language, so we didn't have the English version until now, but now we do. 1 black mana for a sorcery, target opponent reveals their hand, you choose an artifact or creature card from it, exile that card, and then it also has cycling 3. Now what's cool about this card is you can use it in your own discard deck to cycle it away once you get to that point later on in the game when you're just trying to trigger all of your cycling benefits, all of your discard benefits. Just cycle this away. It's another way to do that. But also in the early game, it can get rid of that key artifact or creature that your opponent wants to curve out with so that it slows them down so you have time to get to all of those discard payoffs in your own deck. And the nuance about this card that I really, really like is the fact that it exiles. So if you're in like a mirror match, you don't want to trigger your opponent's discard synergies, the things that will give them value whenever they discard. This doesn't make them discard. This actually makes them exile. And I actually feel like the cycling / discard deck is going to be a huge deal in Standard going forward. So I wouldn't be surprised if a lot of the discard decks start to pivot and only play discard that specifically exiles so that it doesn't trigger your opponent's discard payoffs if they're in that deck, because I think that deck is going to be that much of a big deal that you'll need to do that. But having a card like this that can hit whatever you need for 1 mana, but also be cycled away later to trigger all of those payoffs is super, super nice. Next up, we've got Skyshear Chariot. This is the next rare. A 3/3 artifact vehicle for 1 white and 1 with flying, and it crews for 2. So it's already a pretty decent card to give you some evasion and a win condition for relatively little mana. As this vehicle enters, you choose a non-land card name. Activated abilities of sources with the chosen name cost 2 more to activate. In this set in particular, there are so many crazy activated abilities with things like exhaust and stuff like that, that having this ability specifically in this set makes it really, really good. Making all of those exhaust abilities cost 2 more, every ability period costs 2 more, can be pretty nuts. Granted, you have to pick one, right? You don't get to make literally everything. I guess the right way to word it is you can make anything cost 2 more, right? Not everything, unless you get a bunch of copies. Although I guess you could crew this, turn this into a creature, and then play a Mockingbird for 2, copy it, choose a new card name, or maybe the same card name, and you just start multiplying the tax. That seems kind of cool. But anyway, I think the best way to use this is to hit something like a Planeswalker, because now all their loyalty abilities cost mana to activate, which is pretty interesting. And there will definitely be some bomby cards in this set that have insane activated abilities that this helps to kind of nerf. So a card like this, you kind of have to see it in action before you really know how good it is. But I have a feeling that this card's going to be a lot better than people give it credit for at first, because it's so dependent on where the decks land when the dust settles, what cards are actually being used, how many abilities are actually relevant. This card could be a really, really good sideboard card in particular in the new meta. But next up, we've got Stampeding Scurryfoot, a 1/1 mouse for 1 green mana, and it has an exhaust ability where you pay 1 green and 3, put a +1/+1 counter on this creature, and create a 3/3 green elephant creature token. So your 1/1 becomes a 2/2 and gives you a 3/3 for 4 mana. You can only use that once per game because it's an exhaust ability, but still pretty interesting for a common. Honestly, I've seen a lot worse for commons in my day, so being able to scoop this up a little bit later in a draft and fill out your curve with this thing that you can play on 1 and then later on gives you a lot more value than just the 1 card, I think it's pretty cool. But next up, we've got Fuel the Flames. This is an instant for 1 red and 2. It has cycling for 2, so you can discard it to draw a card if you don't need it. But if you do need it, Fuel the Flames deals 2 damage to each creature. So it's a Pyroclasm that costs 1 more mana to actually play, but the trade-off is if you don't need to play it, you can cycle it away and draw a card. In fact, even if you do want to play it, you still have the option of cycling it away to draw a card if you don't think it's going to be quite enough to catch you up on the current board state. So having that versatility is nice. It's also another really good option for like a sweeper, pseudo-sweeper in a deck that's focused on discard payoffs and cycling, because again, you can use this earlier in the game to sweep the board, but if you have it later on, you can just cycle it away to trigger all of your discard payoffs, get that value, draw another card, and just keep the ball rolling. So again, another good example of a card that I think might make the cut in those kinds of decks in particular. But next up, we've got Debris Beetle, the next rare, a 6/6 artifact vehicle with trample for 4 mana in the colors of Golgari. It crews for just 2, making this a pretty insane card, honestly. 6/6 Trampler for 4 mana, and all you have to do is tap 2 powers worth of dudes to crew it. Pretty powerful, can probably end games in the right deck, but also when it enters, each opponent loses 3 life and you gain 3 life. So no matter what, you're draining them for 3 right away, and if they don't get rid of this, you have a 6/6 Trampler they have to deal with as long as you have a 2-power creature that can crew it. Yeah, this makes me feel like maybe the Rock is back. Can the Rock be a deck again in Standard? Because that would be so fun, and this feels like the kind of card that would be in a deck like that. It's also worth noting that if you have ways to flicker this or replay it in any way, you get to keep re-triggering the Lightning Helix effect to the opponent's head, and yeah, that could be really good too. I just like this card, but we're gonna move on. Next up, we've got Wretched Doll, a 3/1 artifact creature toy for 1 black and 1. You can pay 1 black mana and tap the Wretched Doll to surveil 1. So, nothing crazy, but it is a 3-power creature for 2 mana that counts as an artifact, which could be super relevant in the right decks, especially in limited, and it has this little bit of built-in extra value where you could theoretically hold it up as a blocker and make your opponent not want to swing in. Even if they do swing in and you decide to trade this with their creature, you can tap it, surveil one before it dies, and get a little bit of extra value. And if you need things in the graveyard, that gets even better. But even if you don't need things in the graveyard, just using this as a way to kind of scry the top card and make sure you're drawing into the next thing you need, or at least one card closer to drawing into the thing that you need, seems pretty decent as, you know, just built-in little bit of extra gravy. So I really like this. I think it's going to be pretty cool and limited. But next up, we've got Ghastal Thrill Roller, a 4/2 artifact vehicle with trample and haste for 1 red and 2. It crews for 2, but when this vehicle enters, it becomes an artifact creature until end of turn. So the first turn you play it, you don't need to crew it. Because of the haste, it swings in immediately, and it has trample, so it's probably getting through for damage no matter what. The more I think about this card, the better I think it is, but it doesn't stop there, because you can also pay 1 red and 2 colorless, discard any card, return this card from your graveyard to the battlefield with a finality counter on it, activate only as a sorcery. I truly think this card is better than people are going to give it credit for at first glance, because the mono red decks right now are so fast and so focused on buffing up their dudes, having prowess triggers, that sort of thing. I think this is going to get a little bit overlooked and slept on at first. But a couple different things I want to point out. First of all, this is a way to trigger your discard outlets if you're in the cycling or discard deck. If you have ways to pay off cycling or discarding things, you can discard a card to put this back on the battlefield and trigger those payoffs, and then have a 4-power trample haste creature swinging in immediately. And it doesn't say when it enters from your hand or when you cast it, it becomes an artifact creature until end of turn. It's just when it enters. So when you bring it back from the graveyard, it's still gonna be a vehicle right away that turn with haste that can swing without needing to crew it. So in a way, I actually think this card is super deceptively good, because you play it on 3, you swing in for 4. If your opponent kills it, now you can just discard a card to bring it back. It's an artifact creature again right away, can swing in again without needing to crew it, which means if they didn't kill it, the creature that would have crewed it so that you could attack with it now doesn't have to crew it. So now the creature you would have crewed it can attack itself, and you can get in for even more damage. That just seems really good to me. So being able to sort of like come back from removal, keep the pressure on regardless, and having turns where you don't need to accrue this thing, like I said, I think it's a lot better than it looks on the surface, especially because you do have that discard outlet built into this and can maybe get a little bit of extra value that way by triggering your discard payoffs. So it could fit into discard decks, it could fit into aggro decks, it could fit into some new crazy vehicle deck. There's potential for this to go a lot of different ways, and I'm excited to brew with it and see where it lands and see if it's actually good enough to make the cut in any of those standard decks. Just a really cool card, and there's a lot to think about with it. But next up, we've got Rover Blades, a 3-mana artifact equipment vehicle, which is a 2/2 with double strike, has crew 2, equips for 4, and equipped creature has double strike. That is a lot on one card. So first thing right off the bat, it comes in as a vehicle that can crew for 2 for 3 mana, and when you crew it, it becomes a 2/2 double striker. That's already pretty decent, right? That's not bad. But if you get to a point where you have extra mana later in the game, you could just pay 4, equip this to something else, maybe the creature that would have crewed it, and then give that thing double strike, and then you don't have to worry about crewing it each turn. Now it's just there, attached to that creature for pretty much ever, and can just start swinging in with double strike, and also swing in with whatever would have crewed this, and not have to worry about crewing it. So really interesting card. It might be a little bit too slow, but I like the idea that in the interim you can use this, you know, by crewing it, and it's not a complete waste. And then when you do have more mana, it can become a little bit better than that. And if they kill the creature it's equipped to, it drops off, can still be crewed in attack, can still be re-equipped. Really interesting stuff here, and I'm excited to see just like how good this ends up being, because it's definitely one of those cards where we haven't really got a card like this. We've got plenty of artifact creatures that can also be equipment and become artifact creatures when they're not equipment anymore, but we haven't seen a vehicle like this. And I think it's going to be really hard to gauge how good a card like this actually is until we see it in action, and until we get a better idea of just how the sequences work out and how the curving out works and all of that. But definitely an interesting card, definitely has a ton of potential, especially in Limited. I think you probably just play this in Limited because access to a 2/2 double striker by only, you know, crewing for 2 is good enough on its own regardless of the equipment thing, I think, especially in a deck where you get synergies for vehicles. So I think this is going to be a slam dunk in Limited, but it'll be really interesting to see just where this card lands. I think there's a lot of potential. Hold up, we have one more spoiler that was just posted as I was recording this video, and I wanted to make sure to include it, so we're going to cut this in really quick. This is Ovia Automech Artisan, a 1/2 legendary human artificer for 1 green and 3. Each creature that's attacking one of your opponents has trample, and you can pay 1 green and tap it to put a creature or vehicle card from your hand onto the battlefield. If you put an artifact onto the battlefield this way, put 2 +1/+1 counters on it. This card is disgusting. Even if you use this fairly, just giving your creature trample for free, putting things into play from your hand for free is bananas, but your opponent can just use removal on Ovia, right? That's where it gets nuts with, and I hate to mention it again because I feel like I'm beating a dead horse here, but Agatha's Soul Cauldron. You exile Ovia with Agatha's Soul Cauldron, and every single creature you control with a counter on it has the ability to pay 1 mana and tap and put any creature or vehicle from your hand onto the battlefield. Not only that, but it immediately gets 2 +1/+1 counters, which means because it has +1/+1 counters on it, it's going to get all of the abilities that are being dished out by Agatha's Soul Cauldron immediately. It doesn't even have to wait for Cauldron to put a counter on it. This card was meant for Soul Cauldron. I think Soul Cauldron's going to be banned. I don't know, that card's just going to be insane with all of the new exhaust abilities and even the non-exhaust abilities like this. Just absolutely nuts. Even outside of that though, just being able to, for 1 mana, put whatever you want into play every turn seems busted. And even in the meantime, just getting to give trample as this little bit of extra value upside seems kinda gnarly. So I'm really interested to see what kind of decks this thing ends up in aside from Soul Cauldron decks. I think there's potential for it to be in other decks for sure, but with Soul Cauldron absolutely broken, and I expect to see this there day 1. But next up, we have the last card of today, and one of the best cards we've seen in the set for older formats in particular. This one is Salvation Engine, a 6/10 artifact vehicle for 1 white and 4 that crews for a whopping 6. That seems like it's not worth it. 5 mana is a lot, crewing for 6 is an awful lot, and granted 6/10 is a big body, but it's still just 6/10. It's not like it has trample or anything like that. But the other 2 abilities on it are what really make it crazy. First of all, other artifact creatures you control get +2/+2. So this is a double Anthem effect for all artifact creatures. And they don't have to be colorless or anything like that. You can have colored artifact creatures and they're still going to get the buff. And the most important part of that is it's going to work for all of your vehicles. Every time you crew a vehicle and you're ready to swing in with it or block with it or whatever, it's going to get the buff from the Salvation Engine, which is kind of awesome. But in addition to that, whenever this vehicle attacks, return up to 1 target artifact card from your graveyard to the battlefield. So if you do manage to crew this thing for 6 and swing in with it, you can bring back like a Portal to Phyrexia or some other really big vehicle or whatever bomby artifact you have in your graveyard that you want. It goes straight to the battlefield and it stays there forever no matter what happens to the Salvation Engine. And the fact that it has such a big toughness means if you are swinging specifically in order to do that, it's going to be really hard for your opponent to kill this thing in combat to prevent you from being able to use it on future turns. And that's a little bit of upside as well. I just keep seeing that crew 6 and think it's a lot, but maybe we can use it with some other cards that make it a little bit more reasonable, like the new Kaladin card that we already spoiled in this set that gives all vehicles haste and makes them automatically crew when you play them, the turn that you play them. That could be nuts with this, because you just slam it and it can just swing in right away, bring back any artifact you want right away, and that could be nuts. But I think the best use of this card, as I mentioned at the start of talking about this card, is in older formats with Greasefang. Because Greasefang lets you bring back any vehicle from your graveyard, immediately automatically cruise it, you swing with it, and then at the end of turn, it returns that vehicle to your hand, which in some situations can be an upside if it's something you want to recast, but in a lot of situations is a downside, because now you have to recast it later, and usually the vehicles you want to grab with Greasefang are really expensive, so you don't necessarily want to be in a position where you have to recast them later, but this kind of gets around that. If you can get this into your graveyard along with the thing you would normally bring back with Greasefang, like the Perihelion or something like that, you can grab this out of the graveyard with Greasefang. It becomes crewed automatically, it gains haste, it attacks, and then the Salvation Engine itself brings your Perihelion or whatever other crazy vehicle you have in the yard back into play, except it's not being brought back into play with Greasefang. So you don't have to return it to your hand at end of turn like you would if you brought it back with Greasefang. Instead, at end of turn, you return the Salvation Engine to your hand, which costs 5 to replay, and is a lot more reasonable that if you get to the mid-game without killing your opponent, maybe you do end up replaying this, unlike a Perihelion, where you're probably not replaying that. And then your Perihelion or whatever you got back is sitting there on the battlefield forever. Never has to go back to your hand. Never has to worry about that Greasefang stipulation. And that's just nuts. So the more I think about this card in regards to that deck in particular, I think this card is at the very least worth trying and seeing how crazy it could be. It possibly might be a little too slow, a little bit too win more. It's going to take testing before we know for sure, but at the very least, it is absolutely worth trying, and at most, it could be a core part of that deck moving forward that is just fundamental and gives you even more gas so that you can more consistently close out games that much quicker, and that's exciting, I think, for that deck, but I'm still really excited to see how we can brew this in Standard, what we can use it with, maybe that no Call It In card, maybe there's some other cards that make the Crew 6 more reasonable. Very excited to find out. If you have ideas about stuff to pair this with in Standard in particular, definitely let me know in the comments, because I'm excited to just dig in and see what we can do with this card. But that's going to do it for today. Thank you guys for checking out the video. Please, please, please like the video. I mean this from the bottom of my heart that it matters so much to me, and it makes such a difference in getting this video out to more people and helping the channel to grow, and it would mean just so much. Also, subscribe if you're new so you never miss an upload. Tons of crazy content on the way. And in the meantime, catch me live Monday through Friday over on Twitch. That's twitch.tv/QuarantineCapricorn. Because if I'm alive and I'm breathing, I'm there and I'm streaming. Discard decks are going to be so broken. Agatha's Soul Cauldron is going to be so broken. Man, so many things. So many things in this set are going to be so broken. Thanks so much for checking out my channel. I'd like to give a huge shout out to all of my patrons over at Patreon. Without you guys, this channel would not be possible, so honestly, thank you from the bottom of my heart for all of your contributions. If you haven't yet, like and subscribe. The more likes we get and the quicker we get them, the bigger this channel will grow and the faster it will grow. I'd love nothing more than this channel to become something very special for you guys, but it's entirely up to you how fast that happens. Also, if you'd like more deck text, that's somewhere over there. And if you'd like to see what else the channel's been up to lately, that's somewhere up that way. Also, subscribe, circle below, do all the things.